Welcome to the Daily Allegory through Astrological Divination. Cheers. In case you're wondering, the wine of the day is Carnivore. Before I start the video, I just want to do a little PSA. This season, I've been dubbing it Find Out, because last season was Fuck Around. So in this season, what we're doing is we're cutting any excess fat that we had from the past and leaving it there. Those doors are going to remain closed. So if something extravagant and wonderful were to happen, just know that if you aren't in my circle currently, you're remaining where you are. The distance will be consistent because we are doing consistency and stability this season. So, no random relatives, no, hey, how you doing? Stay consistent. Keep it moving. I'm going to start with a magic motto for this video, and this video I titled The Dark Horse Protocol. What hunts in shadows forgets, the dark horse remembers, for this dark horse is the ushering of divine judgment. The story is about a ruthless crime ring who decides a man is unworthy of his freedom and trust fund. So they plot to frame him by planting evidence and engineering his destruction, only for an ultra-secret authority even beyond the FBI to intercept the scheme after learning the target's compartmentalized clearance eclipses the group's own intelligence world connections. They covertly bug his apartment expecting to catch him slipping, but instead record something far darker. Coordinated coercion, drugging, assaults, sexual assaults used as leverage against his children, backroom deals, staged wellness interventions, a planted therapist reporting back, a web of landlords in complicity, and maintenance crews complying with odd favors, and friends installing illegal monitoring tools while comparing notes on him like an operation. Alongside IP diversions and dark web streams where suffering is monetized and a man is labeled as the dark horse on the dark web. Hopefully you bet on that one, because that's where my money would be. Yet the recordings reveal a devastating contrast. While the group manufactures narratives and scripts and counters, the man remains relentlessly authentic, calm, confused at times, but never hateful. Because he's always been steps ahead, quietly participating in a clandestine government operation trialing the use of telepathic communication and radio frequency-linked brainwave data to map the ring's every single tactics for a new type of counterintelligence. The final twist reframes everything. One insider knew this man's true identity, and it wasn't the one that was doctored and incorrect on paperwork, but an ancient star bloodline descendant tied to the old gods and the Anunnaki. And the man was never meant to be the sacrifice at all. It was the opposite, the group was. See, they were offered up as a catalyst to awaken dormant genes encoded in his DNA and trigger the initiation that had been waiting since his birth. And standing along the edge of his initiation, all lights are green. This is the Dark Horse Protocol, and we are live. They decided he didn't deserve oxygen, not because he'd done anything unforgivable, not because he'd hurt anyone, although that was one of the fabricated narratives about him. Those details weren't necessary when a group is hungry and a trust fund is close enough to smell. They deemed him unworthy of life, unworthy of freedom, unworthy of the inheritance they'd convinced themselves was wasted on someone so quiet, so pathetic, so unconnected and insignificant, or so they thought. The why him mentality, why him? In their private language, he became a problem to solve, and in their public language, he would become a monster to prosecute. They built their plan the way parasites build a nest, inside something living. It started with small intrusions, an old friend asking pointed questions about finances, a concerned acquaintance guiding conversation towards vulnerabilities. Sometimes vulnerabilities are usually listed and triggered on the mega platform, where people are used in correlation to computer-coded language and vulnerabilities and bounties are related to real people and actual targets. That'd be pretty fucked up, huh? A therapist's recommendation offered with a smile too polished to be real. Then the landlord grew suddenly attentive. The building's maintenance crew began appearing for routine checks at times that felt slightly too convenient, remembering that Pennsylvania has a 24-hour notice law, but we break that all the time. The man noticed, but he didn't protest. He simply watched the watchers and let them believe that they were invisible. Above it all, the sky arranged itself into a cold geometry, a stellium and Aquarius. Mercury, Venus, Sun, Mars, Pluto. It's been a consistent stellium the last few days. Not a good one to play around with, I might add. Gathered like a council of machines, an algorithm and intellect, charm, identity, force, and annihilation. In that sky, Mars and Aquarius didn't rage. It calculated. It didn't shout. It networked. And when Mars conjunct Pluto in the 10th tightened its grips, it promised something public, something reputational. An execution not just of a body, but of a name. Or names. In the angles, Mars sextile Lilith in the 12th whispered the deeper threat. She whispered the deeper threat. Covert hostility, hidden appetites, shadow deals that lived behind locked doors. The group thought they were the ones working in shadows. They began planting evidence the way that you scatter seeds. Patient, repetitive, confident that the right conditions would make lies sprout into facts. They coordinated narratives, rehearsed statements, arranged psychological warfare tactics, curated screenshots, they chose dates, they placed objects. They installed software after breaking into his apartment and on his phone, not realizing that the whole time they were watching him. He played his role to keep them distracted enough not to realize that his team had been watching them and tracing their digital footprints the whole time. They staged encounters. They wanted him panicked, erratic, easy to frame. They wanted him isolated, a social pariah, so nobody would go looking for him or reach out when he went missing when the accident happened. You know, covering all ends. What they didn't know was that their plan had been overheard. Not by local authorities, not by the usual alphabet soup. Something higher, much, much older, more surgical and precise. Something so compartmentalized and clandestine it doesn't exist in any official document or record, physical or digital. It just isn't, but it is. They quietly plugged into the situation the moment the intended target's name appeared on an internal channel that shouldn't have existed. The kind of channel that doesn't appear on org charts. The kind that doesn't leave paper trails. Because the man they'd selected wasn't merely wealthy or naive or even alone. He held compartmentalized intelligence and clearance that surpassed even the group's most boastful connections. Those smug little CIA-adjacent favors they traded like poker chips at dinner parties. The moment the higher authorities caught wind of a scapegoated plan, they didn't rush in with sirens. They did what truly powerful systems do. They listened. They bugged the man's apartment, not as an invasion, but as a containment field. A nest cast around a whole ecosystem of predators. Or wannabe predators. They watched the building's network traffic, mirrored the flows of data, and mapped the patterns of contact. Not as a tutorial, not as a stunt, simply as procedure. The quiet mechanics of counterintelligence. Hold on. The quiet mechanics of counterintelligence doing exactly what counterintelligence always does, turning shadow into evidence. What the recordings captured wasn't just criminal. It was beyond inhumane. And I mean inhumane. Like, these people really did the most. There were nights when the group came in pairs, carefully timed, faces composed, voices soft with practiced cadence and concern. There were nights when the man complied, smiling, even because the threat to his children never stopped humming in the background. The group used threats like a remote control, pressing buttons from afar. Do this or they disappear. Do this or they don't come home. Do this or we make it permanent. The man did things that looked self-administered because the group demanded it. Because that was how they collected blackmail to coerce people. Because it was part of their blackmailing method. When they blackmail people. You know, basically at gunpoint, under duress. because compliance was sometimes the only way to keep the immediate danger from escalating. And when they drugged him, when they assaulted him, when they treated him like an object they could pass around and reinforce dominance, the man still found a way to keep his voice steady. He didn't fight them. He documented them. Not with a camera, not with a notebook. Those type of things could be taken, destroyed, used against him even. He documented them with the only thing he trusted, his mind, his breath, his unwavering insistence on remaining himself. The higher authority listening in expected panic, bargaining, even rage. Instead, what they caught was something unsettling. A man who sounded honest even when he was breaking. A man confused at times, wounded, but never hateful. Never calculating in the way the group was calculating. The contrast was absolute brutality. It was the sound of predators describing a target as if he were a case study, like a human experiment. And the sound of the target still speaking like a human being. The group's network expanded. There were sinister phone calls and back-end deals recorded in the same tone you'd use to basically order an appetizer from Applebee's. There were random encounters that happened with the precision of choreography. There was laughter about him at dinner parties, his habits, his reactions, his private life dissected between sips of wine. There were admissions spoken casually, that they were collecting information, just in case. That they were building leverage. They were keeping the option to destroy him open like a tab in a browser. And there were streams. Oh, were there streams. Dark web broadcasts where suffering became currency. See, the group monetized humiliation and psychological torment the way corporations monetize attention. Their audience wasn't just one person. It was a market. The man had a name there. The Dark Horse. A symbol. A brand almost. A product. They sent people with hidden agendas and scripted conversations, fake concern masking real surveillance. The therapist they recommended wasn't there to help. The therapist was there to report. To gather. To steer him towards breakdown that could be packaged into proof. Proof of their narrative. They literally steered this man and navigated him on a path with no options other than to follow the channels where they had to record their narrative to validate their story. The mutual friend wasn't there to care either. The friend was there to probe, to harvest financial details and emotional weaknesses like a gardener picking fruit. Even the building itself became an accomplice. Recordings captured the landlord and maintenance crew installing illegal monitoring equipment and software. Even on computers that the man never touched. But he knew when they were. Comparing notes afterwards like technicians in a lab. They coordinated approaches, divided up information, assigned roles. It was an operation. Except the operation was not the one they thought were running. Because the only operation the man belonged to was something far stranger than their greed could imagine. It began with a computer no one ever touched when outsiders were present. Hidden behind ordinary furniture like a mundane secret. It began with carefully timed instructions delivered through channels too subtle to notice unless you knew what you were listening for. It began with the man sitting alone, eyes half-lidded, and speaking softly to the air. Almost looked like he was talking to himself sometimes. Not to spirits, not to imaginary friends, but to quiet machinery of an experiment. He wasn't hallucinating, though. He was communicating. A trial protocol, classified beyond the usual brackets of secrecy. Built around the exchange of data through altered states, gamma and theta patterns, radio frequency linked monitoring, an interface designed to translate mind into signal and signal into instruction. It was like he was communicating with his mind to a computer from a far distance using radio frequencies piggybacking off the gamma and theta waves that naturally exist in your mind. And vice versa, with the computer sending signal through said frequencies and receiving that information. Now, the higher authority, clandestine operators who did not introduce themselves. It was all based on clearance. Used his presence like a lighthouse. They didn't need him to hunt the group. They needed him to remain authentic long enough for the group to reveal itself fully. And it did. The Aquarius stellium overhead felt like a cosmic blueprint for what unfolded. Mercury was the information. Venus was social leverage, fused with the sun, which was exposure. Mars was the strategy, and Pluto, total transformation and death. It was a network that became visible, a social web hardened into a structure, and Mars conjunct Pluto in the 10th ensured the end wouldn't be private. It would be absolute public scandal. And it would be official. It would be an unmasking with consequences that reached into reputations, careers, and institutions in a manner that they weren't really comfortable with. They had an idea what they were getting into when they started. The group believed they were building a false narrative around him. They didn't realize they were building a true narrative around themselves. Everything that they did, every staged intervention, every manipulated phone call, every humiliating demand was captured and cross-referenced. The higher authority mapped their tactics like a taxonomy. Taxonomy is one of my methods used in my omnikinetic formulation. You might want to touch up on what that word means while we're being intelligent. It's coercion patterns, recruitment habits, threat structures, financial flows. They watched how the group handled dissent, how they punished hesitation, how they normalized cruelty. And in the middle of it all, the man kept living, not with joy, not with ease, but with a strange calm that made the recordings almost unbearable to review. He cooked. He spoke gently to his children when he could. He apologized for things that weren't his fault. He whispered reassurances into the dark as if comfort itself were a weapon he refused to surrender. He always knew. Not the arrogant way people claim foresight after the fact. He knew in advance. Because the advantage he had wasn't money or clearance or unseen connections. Though, he had those too. Wrapped in layers of classification and favors owed, the advantage was something the group could not steal with threats, could not extract with coercion, could not buy with greed, even with billions of dollars. He was telepathic. Not the dramatized version of the movies that you see, not voices screaming in his head or cheesy mind-reading tricks, something quieter, more precise, a genuine ability to receive intent as if it had weight, to feel deception like static, to sense conversations before they happen the way some people sense storms in their bones. It was why he never fully believed their performances and knew exactly how to trick them into running their script by playing the role needed to entrap them by any means necessary. It was why their scripted concern always sounded slightly off. It was why the random encounters felt kind of staged. It was why he'd never been fooled by the therapist's carefully practiced empathy. He didn't guess, he perceived. Introspection is a hell of a thing when you master it. And deeper still, beneath even that, beneath the clearance, beneath the telepathy, was a truth that no one had permission to say out loud. His identity on paper was doctored. A fraudulent biography stitched together to hide a lineage that didn't fit anywhere into modern systems. He had been given a false shape so he could move through the world unnoticed. But he wasn't what he thought. He wasn't what they thought he was. He came from a different bloodline, exclusive, ancient, predating most human beings, starbound, a living descendant of the old gods of the stars, a lineage that, in the most forbidden corners of myth and classified obsession, was traced back to the Anunnaki, with names like Enlil and Marduk spoken in whispers, not prayers. Only one person inside the group knew the man's true origin. One person knew. That person wore the group like a costume, played their role, smiled at their jokes, took their calls, helped write their plan. What a concerned member. And all the while, he kept one detail to himself. The targeted man was never the sacrifice. You can't kill an immortal, you see, because the person who knew the truth understood something that the others could never. Attacks can be a catalyst. Trauma can be an ignition. Pressure can be the specific fire required to awaken dormant genetics. Encoded long ago by an uncle who was never named in family photos, only hinted at in nightmares and inexplicable gifts. They believed they were breaking him. They in fact were waking him. The turning point arrived the way turning points always do, quietly, then all at once. The group's confidence peaked. They scheduled the final push. The planted evidence. The coordinated accusations. The public collapse engineered to strip him of freedom and assets in one clean sweep. Tell him to go to the woods and die after forcing him out of his apartment. They rehearsed the timeline. They believed the world would accept their story because they had money. They had connections. Professionals willing to lie for them. Look at me. Ooh, money and power. Totally trumps alien genetics and government connections that you wouldn't even understand. They did not account for Mars sextile Lilith in the 12th. The hidden adversary. The covert feminine dark current that exposes what is buried. See, there was a dark feminine and Lilith energy exposing all of this shit in the background to help and assist this clandestine operation. They didn't realize the very secrecy they relied on had attached something far more secret than even themselves. On the night they moved to seal his fate, the man sat in his apartment with the stillness of someone listening to a song no one else could hear. He knew his children were safe, so he moved quietly, protected by hands that did not announce themselves. The group didn't know that either. He opened his eyes and spoke one sentence into the air softly. We're going to whisper this now. It's time. In the surveillance feeds, nothing supernatural happened. No glowing runes, no levitation, no theatrical lighting. Just a shift in a man's posture like a door unlocking behind his ribs. Then the group arrived. They came with practiced faces and rehearsed concern, with threats disguised as help, with demands wrapped in a tone meant to make him feel ashamed. They tried to steer him into the final script scene where he would look unstable, dangerous, guilty even. A total shit show. Instead, the man was calm. He greeted them as if they were neighbors. He listened as if they were confessing. And because he could perceive intent, because he could hear the shape of their thoughts, he responded to what they meant, not what they said. That alone began to unravel them, the way a threat begins to snag when it's pulled through a needle too narrow for its own lies. A member of the group laughed, very uneasily. Another tried to regain control with a familiar threat. Their voices began overlapping at that point, the script frayed. The predator mask slipped. In the recording, there was a moment, small, almost nothing, when one of them looked around the room as if sensing they were not alone. They were correct. But not the way that they feared. The authority above the FBI did not burst in dramatically. They had what they came for. They had months and months and months of counterintelligence, mapped patterns, corroborated evidence, and audio that captured not only the group's crimes, but their delight in committing them. Absolute fucking delight. Could you imagine torturing people, streaming it for profit? I'm guessing somebody almost became a millionaire, but the site got shut down. Wonder where that money went. But imagine relishing in the fact of tormenting human beings. How funny would it be to launch psychological warfare back taunting people in public to their imminent doom and gloom? The group didn't understand why the man wasn't afraid. They didn't understand why he wasn't begging. They didn't understand why he wasn't bargaining with the same desperation that they used to control him. Because he already knew the end of the story and how it ends. He'd known from the beginning. See, he had unique protection from birth, woven into him not as luck, but as design. And now, under the cold counsel of the Aquarius stellium, the Mars and Pluto fused in the 10th like a public executioner's blade. The world began to pivot towards consequence. The insider, the one who always knew, watched the group crumble in real time. Watched their arrogance collide with inevitability. Watched their scapegoat plan invert into a sacrificial rite they never consented to. Oh, what fun. He had set them up, not to save the man, but to initiate him, to awaken what had been dormant, to force the old blood to rise and remember who it was. And when it was over, when the group had left, shaken, still believing that they had control, the man stood alone in the apartment and stared into the dark as if staring into deep space. It was almost as if he was standing on a pivotal point between realms where he could see into the spiritual and the abysmal plane. In the most ordinary voice, so ordinary, he said almost kindly, "You never understood. I was never the target." Outside, the city remained the city. Cars passed, lights changed. People lived their lives unaware. But somewhere above the visible chain of command, files were opened that had not been opened in decades. Names were flagged, warrants got prepared, networks mapped. A machine of consequence began to turn to come live, and we are all lights ago. And in a hidden place where the dark web once celebrated, the dark horse, a different kind of silence spread, sharp and sudden, like a candle being pinched out between fingers. Cut that cord. Because this group had tried to bury a man under a false narrative, and instead they had dug their own grave and lit the fire that woke a living god. Under Aquarius steel, under Mars-Pluto pressure, the truth didn't just surface, it activated. That's all I have for you guys today. I'll see you in the next one.